What is up, everyone? Welcome to the first episode of Canna Say Something. My name is Andrew Ward, aka the Canna Writer. I'm very excited to have you here. Even more so, I'm excited to have my first guest, Emminent Consulting co-founder and CEO Emma Chasen. If you don't know her yet, you will soon. She's an Ivy League educated industry educator and developer who's basically telling consumers in the entire supply chain how to explore the plant and various cannabinoids without falling into the marketing jargon that we often get dealt with, but also why that's important too. She and I got to talk about a number of topics, including how she linked up with her business partner, Matt Taylor, at the cannabis brand Pharma before they brought their business back east. We also talked about the ongoing issues between indica and sativa classifications, the rise of psychedelics reform in the space, our mutual funds for tattoos, Emma's recent engagement, as well as the lack of LGBT inclusivity in cannabis today, even though LGBT folks have been pivotal to the movement from day one. In short, we got a lot to talk about and not a lot of time. But before we do, can I say something to you? Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. You're listening or watching right now when you could be doing anything. So it's my goal to make sure that you're coming away with a fun, informative time. Whether you're a newcomer or an expert alike, I want you to come around with some guests that you haven't seen, or at least talking about some topics that you're not going to be reading or hearing about everywhere else. So if that's not happening, drop me a line and give me some constructive criticism. I'm always down for some tips as long as you aren't a dick. First bit that you might want for constructive criticism, the audio and video quality from my side is going to lag a little bit in the next segment. I apologize to Emma and you as well. Thank you for being patient. Those have been fixed in the episodes to come, and we'll be sure to have Emma back when those glitches aren't present. Also, if you're watching on the webcast, you're about to notice that this beard of mine is going to get a lot bigger all of a sudden. We recorded this a few weeks ago, and since then I've had a shaving mishap that leads me to not know what the hell to do with this beard. So much like the podcast itself, feel free to drop me some criticisms and thoughts on what you'd like to see on my face. Can't guarantee it'll happen, but hey, Lord knows I don't know what the hell to do with it. So your insights will be as good as mine. But that's enough about me. We're not really here for that. Let's dive into what we're really here for, my conversation with Emminent Consulting's Emma Chasen. Emma, pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for being the first person on the recorded and podcast endeavors that I'm doing here. It's exciting to have you. I also just want to kick things off and say thank you so much for your patience. A little bit of how the sausage is made here. I thought I did everything right testing it out here, and then everything went to crap as soon as we started it. So Emma was really patient and awesome. Straight out the gate. Emma, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing today?
Oh my God, thanks so much for having me. Technical difficulties, they always happen when no matter how much you prepare, right?
Exactly.
But I'm doing great. Yeah, I'm super excited to hop on and chat with you and be your inaugural guest in this venture.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you. I think your journey is one of the kind of people that we really want to be featuring on here. You've gone from the Ivy League to working into some really intense, important research projects in and out of cannabis, and then going into cannabis. Love to start off, just a little bit about who you are and what was your journey, from going from the Ivy League to cannabis, and how you've gotten to Emminent today.
Sure. Yeah. So I began kind of my love and study of cannabis personally while I was in my undergrad at Brown. They do a really amazing job of letting their students kind of design whatever course of study they're really most passionate about. And for me, I found myself really being called to medicinal plant research and ethnobotany, which is the study of the way in which indigenous peoples use medicinal plants. And so I was working with a lot of entheogenic plants such as ayahuasca and other, plants that are traditionally used in ceremony, specifically in South America. And I then personally, through my college experience socially, was really starting to fall in love with cannabis and all of its therapeutic benefits. Unfortunately, I couldn't study cannabis formally, but I did have access to quite a lot of, literature, research databases where I could start to study its pharmacology and pharmacognosy on my own time. And I also learned about things such as secondary compounds, terpenes, flavonoids, things that are also present in cannabis as well as other medicinal plants. So I think that also really primed me for being able to learn as much as I could on my own about cannabis. And once I graduated, I went on to do some oncology research with the Brown University research group that we were specifically looking at breast cancer and doing clinical trials with the FDA across the country. But I didn't quite find resonance with what I wanted to accomplish in terms of my career goals there. I went in with definitely a level of naivete, new graduate, thinking that, okay, this is going to be the place where I can really bring cannabis and medicinal plants into the fold. If we're talking kind of timeline, this was 2014, 2015, and I was up in Rhode Island. And so medical cannabis was just starting to be talked about there. Medical cannabis program was just starting to kick off in Rhode Island. And so I thought, perfect, great, let's do something here. But when a professor did propose a cannabis trial to the office, my supervisor just kind of laughed him out of the office. And so, of course, I understand, the legal limitations of being able to actually conduct a cannabis trial, but to have that level of just disrespect towards the plant was definitely an eye-opening kind of light bulb moment for me, where I was like, you know what, this is not where I'm supposed to be.
So it was like more than a dismissal. It was, almost kind of like a personal sort of thing, almost, or not a personal, but like kind of on that level sort of thing.
Yeah. It was just kind of like, oh, that professor, he's ridiculous kind of thing. And I was like, no, why? Why is he ridiculous when we're looking at trials and, funding billions and billions of dollars into cancer research. And yet we're not looking at something that has been anecdotally and in other, scientific literature. There is evidence that the compounds here do have some cancer fighting properties. So why wouldn't we be putting money there? And again, totally understand the legal limitations, but just to have it met with that kind of attitude of like, oh, please, was disappointing, to say the least. But what it did do was it allowed me to, leave that position, much to the dismay of my family, and be like, you know what, I'm moving to Portland, Oregon.
Get in the weed.
Exactly. I never been there before, so it was sight
Wow.
unseen. Yeah, but I convinced my best friend to pack up our cars, drive across the country, and just check it out, see what it was about. And really, I went not with the intention that I was going to get into cannabis right away. I went with the intention that I was going to get my ND, so my naturopathic doctorate, because I have always, loved medicine, again, loved medicinal plants. So I thought that would be a good kind of union for me in terms of looking at this more integrative model of, yes, Western medicine is awesome for certain things, but what it's really lacking is, this preventative, empathetic patient care that I think can lie in the earth and what the earth provides us, really.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I went there with that intention, but needed a job really badly when I arrived. And again, timing really lined up for me, and that it was about a month before the early onset of adult use sales in Oregon. So every single cannabis business was hiring, and I very luckily landed into the lap of a cannabis dispensary pharma that takes a much more scientific approach to the way that they classify their cannabis. And so started out as a bud tender there, thought it was going to be for, a couple months while I got on my feet. Just loved it a ton, became really inspired around this idea of education and training in cannabis science. And the rest is kind of history. Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah. And, I think that's, obviously your pharma is really a pivotal point for you in your career, but you made a really good point that I would love to just dive into if we can for 1 second. The Eastern Western medicine, I feel like the conversation often people are always, very binary. And I feel like it's with a lot of things, the argument is binary, like Eastern is right or Western is right. And, it seems like, with a lot of things, the hybrid of the two is where there's a lot of potential for there to be had. So, where do you, like, it sounded like that's where you were at, can you kind of elaborate on that, the workings of those two kind of medical approaches?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that, as you said, most often it's a more nuanced conversation than just this methodology is the only right way and this methodology is the only right way. Really, it's the integrative approach that in many different sectors of life often makes the most sense to me, and specifically around medicine. So we have this allopathic Western approach, which is you take this singular compound for a specific kind of symptom of an ailment, and that symptom goes away. But then often what happens is there are side effects to that compound, right? And then you need to take another compound to mitigate those side effects. And then, so it's kind of a chain reaction there.
Right.
And I think that where allopathic Western medicine really excels is in technological advancements. I always talk about, like, if you have a broken leg, go to the hospital. If you feel like you're having a heart attack, go to the hospital. Like, there are many, many great things about Western medicine, but I think where it kind of there's some shortcomings is in preventative care, in looking at the body and the human as a whole. So looking at mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health is all being connected, and looking at what we put into our bodies through, all those different avenues, again, whether it be mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, and think about that as kind of causing or preventing disease states. And so looking at, food, as what kind of food do you eat? Do you exercise? What do you do to, you know, fill up your batteries in terms of, do you go outside into nature? Does that bring you peace? Are you under chronic stress because of work? Because that can lead to disease states, right? And I think that's where we look at, Eastern, but also the more what I call just folk approaches, where you are looking at that whole, and you're looking at what you put into your body as far as your diet, and also the different supplements you might take, the different plants that are able, to help not just cure or treat that symptom, but actually target the disease state itself. And so that's where I think that we can use both, sides of that binary, both sides of the dichotomy, to really help us live, the as well as we can, essentially.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think the balance is, huge in a lot of things. We often kind of find ourselves, divided in almost like a tribalist stance on the things that we don't really need to be. So yeah, I appreciate you elaborating on that. On a completely different sort of balance, but also a balance I'm interested in. You met your business partner in Emminent, Matt, at Pharma. Is that correct?
I did. I did.
So yeah, as someone who is staunchly independent freelancer, works on their own, working in a capacity of a collaboration like that, it feels like it's such a foreign concept, but a very interesting one. Well, how did that all come together? And, how have you nurtured and brought that, to where you're at today?
Yeah. I mean, definitely, I quote unquote failed a lot of times. So I didn't work with Matt. Once I left pharma, I freelanced on my own for about a year before Eminent came to be. And during that year, I had a lot of people approaching me wanting to work together, and I had yet to learn just how kind of powerful no can be. And because I was at just the start of building my career, I was saying yes to everything. And so I had, these partnerships, these collaborative relationships that just did not work out for many different reasons. And I had a few that then led me to a point where I was like, you know what? Frick this. I'm going to do it entirely on my own. And I'm just not going to partner with everybody. It's not working. And so I did that for about 6 months, where I was working entirely on my own, doing workshops and creating, this educational curriculum, and putting myself out there to help clients, and all that kind of stuff. But it got to a point where my caseload just got a little heavy for me. And so if I wanted to grow the business and take on more clients and do more things, then I knew that I needed to bring on somebody else to help. But I also knew that I'm not good at everything. Like, I'm good at a small window of things. And so I needed some more diverse skill sets. And when thinking about who that would be, especially after I'd had so many partnerships just not work out, Matt was really the first and the only person that came to mind. We had developed such a strong working relationship at Pharma. I was the general manager for quite some time. He was the kind of intake manager who was doing all the ordering. So we worked very closely together there. We just both have like the same East Coast flavor. He's from outside of Philly. I'm from outside of New York City. So just our communication styles were very compatible. Our hustle was very compatible. And we had remained close after I left pharma, and he went on to work for Agro doing sales. And we still relied on each other quite a bit, just as kind of industry allies, and so when I did come to him and propose this working relationship to really grow a management consulting company, and also to really help bring the curriculum that I'd been working on for the last 3 years, into the world in a way that I felt really proud of. He was super gung ho, and looking at his skill set, I mean, he's an amazing musician, talented recording artist. He's also an artist, visual artist. And he had all the kind of the sales experience on the cultivation side that I never did. So it was
Filling in all
definitely
the gaps.
yes, exactly. And it was definitely a leap of faith, as most things are, but it has really only been awesome,
Nice.
since we've come together.
That's awesome. So you haven't had to have the overcoming any hurdles periods yet so far, or knock on wood, you've
Yeah,
been
not
smooth sailing so far.
really.
Nice.
Yeah,
Awesome.
not really, which is awesome. We've definitely come up with certain um obstacles, I guess is the right word, within the business, and kind of had to come together and put our heads together on how we were going to move through them and how we were going to find solutions there. But we are very solution oriented, and we often agree, which is a blessing. So there
Nice.
hasn't been much of, him being on a certain side and me seeing it completely different. We often kind of, we share the same goals, we want what's best for each other, and it just leads to some really collaborative and successful problem solving.
That sounds like a pretty ideal partnership. That's awesome.
Yeah, I feel very grateful.
So, I'd love to dive in, about the work that you two are doing and the work you're doing on your own, through your education, through businesses, as well as the community. Starting off, what are some of your favorite aspects of the plant or plant medicine in general that you like teaching about the industry right now? What are some of the things that get you most excited to share with the public?
Yeah, I truly think that the foundation is in the way in which people can feel most empowered to get the experience from cannabis that they are looking for or that they desire. A ton of people still have had that one bad experience with cannabis and have kind of wrote it off, as not for them. And I do believe, because of just the pharmacological diversity of cannabis's matrix, that there can be a version of cannabis for everyone, really. I think it's such a good kind of universal tool to just keep in your medicine cabinet. And, that can be CBD, THC, that can be many different cannabinoids, many different terpenes, even, and flavonoids, but people just aren't aware yet, and aren't comfortable yet with that kind of range of diversity and range of experience, and just how personal the experience is going to be for them. There's no one person, and if there is one person, then run for the hills if they try to tell you that, yes, this will, work exactly this way for you every single time.
Always avoid
It's
those folks.
Exactly. It takes a lot of experimentation, but that's not something that in our allopathic model people are comfortable with. They're not used to
Yeah.
that. They're used to getting a prescription, kind of not asking questions, and taking the dose that the doctor
Yeah.
outlines. And so when I go to teach about cannabis science, I think the first thing that I'm always thinking about is, okay, what information, what knowledge can I impart that will make people feel most comfortable and most empowered to start experimenting with cannabis for themselves? And so really beginning to debunk more of the misinformation and the myths that are out there due to, the last century of prohibition
Yeah.
around the a more like fear-based thinking around cannabis. And then diving into, okay, so once we've kind of like, mollified people's anxiety, hopefully, and really spoken about, cannabis can't kill you, all that kind of stuff. How do we then approach even trying to buy cannabis, or approach what we want from that experience? And so debunking the indica sativa myth is kind of my first go-to around, well, we can't use this language, we can't use indica and sativa to really think about what's going to be consistent effect. And so we need to look at more of the cannabinoids and the terpenes and the way that they interact with our bodies to then be able to make a more informed choice for ourselves.
Yeah. Can you actually dive in on that? Because that's one that, in the branding world, I'm seeing all my clients wanting to talked about that right now, trying to really get that public awareness out there. Can you kind of talk about why it's important that the public really needs to shift away from the indica sativa descriptions?
Yeah, definitely. So indica and sativa, they are, for the purposes of this conversation, we will say that they are species of cannabis. That topic is still hotly debated, but most people, at least most consumers, still think of cannabis indica and cannabis sativa as two different species of cannabis. And when these species were classified, I mean, it was the age of enlightenment. So people were just starting to think like, you know what, maybe the church doesn't have all the answers for the natural world. And so one such philosopher of the time, his name was Carl Linnaeus, he is kind of deemed the father of modern taxonomy. And taxonomy is the way in which biological organisms are classified with similar characteristics to be able to just organize the natural world a little bit more for our understanding. And Carl Linnaeus was actually the first person to classify a species of cannabis, and he classified cannabis sativa. And when he made note of cannabis sativa, he noted its morphological or its kind of structural properties. So it grows really tall and skinny. It has these narrow leaves. It has loose female flowers. All of these were noted kind of in his drawing classification of sativa. And I tell my students that there is no real account of him rolling up a doobie of cannabis sativa and being like, whoa, man, I'm totally zooted. It's really
really
focusing.
uplifted now.
Exactly. No, there was just a focus on the way in which the plant grew. Then 30 years later, another taxonomist, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, he was traveling around the world. He was in India. He saw a species of cannabis that looked quite different from sativa. It grew short and stout, had these dense flowers, broad leaf variety. And because he was in India, he was like, you know what, there's enough, variance in the characteristics between Linnaeus' sativa. I'm going to classify a new species, and it's going to be called indica. Again, no point did he make a note as to how it felt. There was never oh my God, I'm totally in the couch right now around indica.
Look effect or look
exactly.
Static almost.
Exactly. And so at the kind of creation of these two terms, there was nothing in their definitions that talked about effects whatsoever. But sure, let's say that maybe there are some terpenes or some compounds within that are more common to indica, that are more common to the sativa species, that did create a certain sense of experience for each species. Fine. If we even, go so far as to say that we hold that belief, well, it doesn't really matter right now because of the incredible amount of breeding that occurred, unchecked breeding during Prohibition. And so because it was all underground, there was no kind of scientific legitimacy around, let me keep a log and keep track of what I'm breeding with what, and also what naming conventions are going where, and having that shared with people. That just wasn't a thing. And so what we got during this time is an incredible level of genetic diversity, which is really great when we look at cannabis from the kind of lens of medicinal properties, that genetic diversity led to quite a large range of compounds, which leads to more therapeutic potential. But what it wasn't so great for is being able to kind of predict experience dependent on species designation and dependent on strain name, because strain names also, and still, yes, there's an etiquette to it, but there's not, a hard and fast rule of, okay, if you get this genetic, then it has to be this different strain. There are still many people who rename strains and genetics all the time in order to make them more marketable. And so when we look at indica and sativa, when we look at strain names, we just have to approach that with, these are just marketing terms. That's it. Actually, they have no guarantee that they're going to make you feel any which type of way, especially because on top of all of this, each person has an incredibly unique physiological system, including our endocannabinoid receptor system. So where my, receptors lie, the density of my receptors in my ECS may be quite different from yours. And so every single person will essentially have their own personal unique relationship with cannabis. And so it's a disservice ultimately to consumers to tell them, well, if you go into a dispensary and you see cannabis indica, it will make you fall asleep no matter what. That's just not true. Instead, we can shop smarter and look towards cannabinoids and terpenes, those compounds that we are actually consuming when we inhale or ingest cannabis, that are binding to receptors, interacting with enzymes, and causing a certain physiological experience.
Right. And, with such a different, unique experience and, behind a lot of people already behind the ball, especially lawmakers, on terpenes and the other compounds really affecting it beyond THC and things like that. Where do you see us going when it comes to regulating this sort of stuff? With cannabis having a unique reaction, everyone, it seems like you can't keep the status quo because people will just keep making marketing terms and passing them off as actual medical effects. But then at the same time, we regulate it. Those people are probably going to screw it up because no one seems to really know the whole system in general, much less if you add all these other compounds to the equation. So where do you think it puts it? Like, how can we make sure that things are safe and accurate for people, but also is it regulations or is it another way? Or what do you see being an ideal path?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we were talking about in the beginning of our conversation, it's kind of a hybrid model, right? So marketing will always exist. I mean, we've now put cannabis into the free market, right? And so, if we were to scientifically name different genetic varieties of cannabis, it would be like H5V9. That's a lot less sexy or desirable than like Mojito number 9, right? Mojito number 9 makes you want to consume it, where the other one kind of sounds like a strain of a disease. And so
we might have to go back into a lockdown.
Right, exactly. And so I think that we will always have strain names because it just makes it enticing and fun, and that's part of the cannabis experience. But I think that we can definitely do away with like at least training our staff as an industry to only rely on indica and sativa designation to recommend certain experience to consumers. And I think that we can also educate consumers to ask more informed questions around cannabinoids and terpenes. I think that to start from a regulation standpoint, every single market should require terpene tests. Not all markets do. In fact, not many do. And to me, that is just a disservice to, the industry professionals who are trying to make smarter recommendations, and also the consumers who are interested in what is actually in their medicine that they're purchasing. So I think that we can make smarter regulations, but we also need to understand that cannabis is in a free market right now. It will continue to go that way. And so we will always have those marketing terms. We just need to know that they are just that, marketing.
So yeah, just accept what it is, but maybe kind of actually develop some regulations, but actually see people have common sense to it, which exactly. that is my concern. Because, the big thing we're talking about now is, THC caps keeps getting floated around. And, I would love to get your thoughts on where you stand on THC caps. A lot of people say, from the lawmaker side, they seem to believe that it's the best idea. But from the medical side, it seems like we get a lot of pushback for it. Where would you fall on that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I think that we then also need to talk about kind of consumption methods, because I think that with THC caps, there is also a kind of discussion around, okay, well, then should we ban concentrates and dabs and the such. And from the research side of it, there isn't a lot of scientific research or evidence to really support the dose of that high of THC for therapeutic purposes. But from the patient side of things and from the anecdotal side of things, there are definitely patients out there who they feel that high of THC dose helps them, have a much higher quality of life. I don't think that we should have a THC ban from, the government regulatory perspective. I think that will just divert a lot of people to the black market. It also will also divert a lot of people to kind of making their own medicine. And when you involve, hydrocarbon solvents, that's never a safe or a good idea. Right. Again, I think that we need to just impart this kind of educational approach within the business as well as with the public, that THC percentage is not everything. That in fact, it is a tiny piece of the puzzle that is actually generating the experience that you're feeling. And I do think that unfortunately, people who focus on THC percentage as the singular determinant of quality are doing themselves a disservice and are also doing the market a disservice, because there are certain growers that grow with beautiful cultivation methodology in terms of organic living soil and sun grown and native soil and compost teas and no pesticides or fertilizers, no synthetics at all. And they can't reach above a 22% THC rating. And that is still pretty high. And yet, because there are things on the market that are coming out with 33% THC, people will gravitate towards that, pay more money for that because they think that that means quality. And to me, that I often use the example of, going into a liquor store and heading right to the Everclear and paying top dollar for the Everclear for like guests that you're having over on a Friday night because you think that's top quality because it has the highest proof. That is silly. And it is also a product of prohibition that I am hopeful that as we do evolve as an industry and we do evolve to, reduce the stigma around cannabis and to educate our industry population as well as the public, that hopefully that's something that will shed, but it does take an actual educational strategy to just let people know that THC is just one thing out of many, many things to look at.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I mean, these subjects are things I would want to pick your ear on for hours on end. And I would love to bring you back like I said, when the audio is going to be better. But to the sake of, keeping you not tied up all day, I'd love to move on to some other subjects before we let you go here. You talked about how plant medicine in general beyond cannabis is just something that you're passionate about and you see the benefits to. We're seeing a rise in psychedelic medicine really starting to take shape as well. Can you kind of talk about, where that's going, where you think that's going, and also maybe the parallel? We're seeing some people really linking psychedelics to cannabis. Some people saying that's a misconception, while some are saying it's a fair comparison. What would you say to that and where we're kind of heading?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about psychedelics. I have used them myself quite a bit, and I just think that their therapeutic potential is very, very profound. The way that they are kind of moving into the space at the moment is very much through the medical track. So through scientific research, through being distributed by therapists, by doctors. And so that's a big difference from the way that the cannabis industry has evolved, where I said earlier, the cannabis industry is in free market capitalism, so we can have brands, we can have billboards, we can have in many markets, as many cannabis brands as can be, will be. And, of course, you have to deal with all of the kind of competition that comes with that free market approach. But also you have a lot of diversity and you have everybody can get, their hands in the game, essentially. With psychedelics, it's not going through that track. So we're looking at, research trials, we're looking at scientific evidence, we're looking at institutions that are being funded and receiving grants, some even from the FDA, I believe, where they're able to study these, compounds in a very controlled environment. And then with Oregon being the first state to actually regulate psilocybin. So in 2023, hopefully they will start being able to administer psilocybin to any Oregonian who wants it. Again, it will not go the route of free market. So there won't be any brands, there won't be any dispensaries where you'll walk into and be able to buy it as a consumer. Instead, you'll have to make an appointment with a trained and licensed therapist in, this kind of psilocybin mediated therapy where you'll sit down, you'll have your intro session, then you'll be deemed fit to take it. You'll take it with the therapist, and then you'll have a follow-up session and that'll be done. There's no, at least right now, there's going to be no, like you taking some mushrooms home or you taking some psilocybin home. And so that's really different than cannabis, right? And I think
you're not seeing party psychedelics coming out.
Exactly. And I do applaud the medical community and the research community and even the kind of activist community that are going this more medicalized route with psychedelic medicine, because it is creating so much more legitimacy, so much quicker among the public compared to cannabis. I think that there are pros and cons to each approach for sure, but I do think that we will see more of the psychedelic medicines kind of take this more scientific route, because it is creating much more acceptance, especially among those healthcare providers and professionals.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I did want to ask though is, you do see some brands introducing like their, microdose products and things like that. So are we going to see the microdose section of the psychedelic world coming out to it? Like seeing, the drops and, the less than 1 milligram chocolates and things like that. Do you see that end up becoming a fixture in the place though?
I definitely see that more so in Canada. I don't know about the United States. I think that the United States is really still like slowly dipping their toes into this landscape. And I do think though that there is some possibility that for people such as in Oregon, who sign up for this therapeutic session, that there might be an opportunity for them to take home a little microdose, and that's where the microdosing products would come in for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see it in that avenue, but we'll see. I mean, a part of me, hopes that that becomes available for people because I still think that there will be a lot of black market kind of activity around
Right.
psychedelics and psilocybin mushrooms and people trying to grow their own. I also have quite many thoughts on the actual, facilities where the therapy sessions will be held.
Yeah.
Most of the trials have been run, with people who, or the most famous trial, I should say, that's been run, people who have had cancer and are really, really afraid now of dying or of coming out of remission and getting it again, have gone through some psilocybin assisted therapy sessions and have had amazing results in terms of calming down the anxiety, depression. But you see them in those sessions, they're in a therapy office with a trusted guide and they'll have, big headphones on. Sometimes there'll be music playing and they'll lay down. And I know that for me personally, in my experience in my community, it is so important when I'm under the influence of psychedelics to be outside, to be in touch with nature, to have the ability to get up and move when I want to move, but also have the ability to feel really safe and kind of cozy and comfortable when that time comes, having access to art and games and different kinds of music. I like to be really kinetic. And so I think that for those people who are desiring that kind of experience, I'm really inspired by the question of how do we create a facility that caters to all of the potential experiences that somebody under the influence of psychedelics might want to have.
That makes sense. Yeah. That would probably be a better chance to see because we're seeing some companies copyright, like, holding hands and, we're using soft blankets and things like that. That seems kind of like a frivolous copyright, but I guess if you can create a whole facility that it, creates those scenarios, then yeah, okay. Then that seems like you've created something really meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, with that kind of with like the copyright and the trademark thing,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
just like, oh my, holding hands is so
Mhm.
corny, but I digress. I do think that it would be really cool to have a facility where there's like a big atrium or like an outside walled garden that people can interact with, where there's like a huge sensory room where there are many different things to touch and to smell and to kind of, play around in. I think that definitely having an art room, like there are just so many different opportunities for healing, and healing doesn't look the same for everybody. It's not all going to be, laying on a couch with headphones on and having that deep internal experience. There is some need for kinesis, and I do think that the facility should cater to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's just like you said before, everyone reacts differently. Everyone has a different experience. We need those varied experiences.
Exactly.
Excuse me. Last question I wanted to have before kind of turn it over to you though is, we've learned a lot about your expertise and your interests and things, but what else are you passionate about, outside of plant medicine? What makes you tick? Like what makes Emma passionate? What are you happy about? What gets you going?
Oh God. Definitely cooking, dinner parties. I think that being that like warmth for my community, especially around people coming together over a meal, is just something that is truly embedded in my DNA. I am Italian and Jewish, so it's quite an intense cultural combination of wanting
Delicious
to,
food.
yes, exactly, but of wanting to provide through that lens. And cooking
Very
for me
much.
is really my meditation and like very therapeutic for me. And so with, my fiance, I do 99.9% of the cooking, but because I want to, I love it. And I also love having people over for, that kind of sharing of a meal. That's so important to me. Also filling up my batteries, going out in nature is big. So going on hikes, going to the beach, having lived in the PNW for the last 6 years, I've been so blessed with like some of the most beautiful nature spots that are there.
Jealous of
Oh
Brooklyn
my
right now.
God, it's so amazing, but just relocated to the East Coast. So I'm back in the New York and soon to be Philly area. So I'm excited to explore some of the more natural spots
Oh,
around
cool.
there.
Welcome back. I
Thank
thought you were still
you.
on the West Coast. Welcome back.
No, yeah, just relocated. So excited to explore that. And then I love, visual art and expression through different mediums. So whether it be, makeup or interior design, I love a lot of color. I'm very inspired by kind of like glam eclectics, and just, creating different things in the world, whatever that may be, is something that is important to me.
Awesome. What's your favorite way of consuming?
Good question.
Or are you a consumer? I assume you are.
I definitely am.
I saw your Instagram, I assume, but just if you changed your mind recently.
No, definitely am a consumer. Typically I do edibles usually. I love low dose edibles. One of my favorite feelings is when I just like start to feel really good and like in my body and just that like juicy like happiness. And it's because I took an edible a couple hours ago and I just forgot that I took it. So I'm like, oh, why am I feeling amazing? I love
this
that.
mood boost all of a sudden.
Exactly. But I do, and this is a little bit of a guilty pleasure, I do love a spliff. So a little bit of cannabis with some tobacco and some other kind of medicinal herbs mixed in there, like a really good salad. And I just love the feeling that like both the nicotine and the cannabis gives. Like I said, guilty pleasure, not necessarily recommending it, but it does work for me.
We all got to enjoy them every once in a while.
Exactly.
No judgment here. Yeah. So, okay. So then, one last thing then in that regard, we're going to try and set up a perfect day for you. You got your spliffs, you got your edibles. Where are you going for a hike? And then what are you cooking afterwards to make it a perfect day for you?
Oh, okay.
I'm hitting you with the hard questions on here.
Yeah. Oh God. I would definitely go to, oh God, probably like just a beautiful waterfall hike if I was in the Pacific Northwest. If I was out here on the East Coast, definitely would do more of a beachy feel. So go for like more like beachy woods on the boardwalk into the beach itself and have a really nice relaxing time. Like I said, if I was still in the PMW, would do a waterfall hike where we would get to swim at the waterfall at the end of it all. And then one of my cooking, definitely an Italian feast. It's one of my favorite meals to cook, like chicken cutlets, penne alla vodka, a good eggplant parmesan, a beautiful salad, broccoli rabe, just all the goodness. I also bake a lot of bread, so a homemade sourdough focaccia would definitely be in there as well.
I can see why this is a good day. Yeah.
Yes, definitely a good day.
Yeah, and you're also a heavily tattooed person like myself here. Any more on the agenda for you right now, or are you giving it a rest?
Oh God, I haven't gotten one, in a long time. I feel like because of COVID, right?
Same. I'm 19 months. I got the itch real bad.
Crazy. Same.
I'm just waiting for summer.
God.
I just want to go in the ocean. As soon as the ocean months are out, then I'm going to get mine.
Yes. So I think that in the winter, I'm going to try to find, again, I'm going to be new to Philly because I'm moving there permanently in October. And so I need to really research.
I got some good recs if you need.
Okay, please send them to me.
I got a lot of friends in the area.
Yes, awesome. Please do, because I'm fairly particular about the style that I like. This definitely being like one of my favorite ones of all time.
Yeah, not everyone's doing it.
Yeah. But yeah, I need some more real bad. I need to like fill up this arm. It's just empty.
Well, I got like a naked side of this arm, and then I got a big chunk here that needs to get filled. And the itch is real.
Yes, absolutely. Right. So send me your recs, please.
We will swap on that, for sure. And then also too, you mentioned your fiance. Congratulations, you recently got engaged.
Thank you. Yeah. That's awesome. I'm very excited about it. That happened end of May this year. So fresh, definitely fresh.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. And if you don't mind me diving in, it's really cool. You're very out and proud about your representation, being a part of the LGBTQ community. It's really awesome to see that in the cannabis space. And, what is that kind of, the level of inclusion in the space? How do you feel about where it is in cannabis? Can it be improved, or are you happy with where you're seeing, or where's the direction in terms of inclusivity going in cannabis?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, I don't see a lot of queer people in cannabis, really. I mean, I'm one of the few. I have a couple other queer women from the Portland zone that I love, and they're doing amazing things. But really, when it comes to cannabis, it is unfortunately like most other, American industries dominated by men, white men in particular. I think that there's a huge conversation, around the amount of Black and brown people who are still in jail for cannabis, still being arrested, and yet white people are profiting off of this plant that is still being, criminalized in their communities. So I think that that is a huge injustice that needs to be remedied. As we evolve and even before we can really go forward. And then when it comes to queer representation, it's such a small community. Queer people who also use cannabis, and I shouldn't say who also use cannabis, but who are actively involved in the cannabis industry. And I don't really know why. I know that a lot of queer people use cannabis. I mean, the queer community that I'm a part of definitely does, but
Backbones of getting the medical movement started.
exactly. But I don't know if it's just that, being queer is such an outward identity that a lot of people hold. Using cannabis is also such an outward identity that people hold. And so it's like, why, again, integrative, why can't we have the two? Why can't we have both? And they're both big parts of who I am. And so I do outwardly kind of hold both identities. And I again don't think it has to look a certain way for everybody. It doesn't have to feel a certain way. It can be incredibly unique and expressive to yourself. But that's something that I definitely hope that more queer people do become involved in the industry. I think that the queer community historically has, such activism roots, right? And also has such artistic roots. And so I think it's something that just
it's only a natural
makes a lot of sense. Exactly.
Part of the community. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, Emma, I appreciate you taking the time to dive in on everything. The last thing I always do on my phone interviews, I'm going to try it here too, is, we touched on a lot of stuff. I know there's a ton more about you, but what do else the readers need to know about you? Where else should they be following you? And what else should we be on the lookout for if there's anything that you got in the future coming up?
Sure. Yeah. So follow me on Instagram. Emma Chasen is a good one. My website is eminentconsultingfirm.com for more like business types of things. And then I do have a full cannabis science course program. You can find that link on my website. But if you have any interest in taking any classes on cannabis science, then I definitely have something for you.
Yeah, and be sure to check out on the info for all wherever we put this. We'll be dropping all of Emma's stuff in there as well. Emma Chasen, thank you so much for joining us on the first run of this. You were awesome. Thanks again for being so patient. And we're looking forward to seeing what you do in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was my conversation with Eminent Consulting's Emma Chasen. Thank you to her for taking the time and talking about such a wide range of topics. I also want to thank you for listening. I hope you came away with some great bits of information. I'm sure you have from Emma, and I hope that I provided something for you as well. Be sure to follow up with next week's episode. We're going to be talking to NCIA's Morgan Fox. We got a lot of great guests coming in the weeks to come. If you are on YouTube, you might be seeing some boxes up here. I don't know. I'm not really that great with this stuff yet, so maybe that'll be up there, maybe it won't. If you listen to a podcast, I don't know, assume boxes popping up in front of your face right now if you're on the right kind of psychedelic. Otherwise, we're going to be back next week with some good episodes. Drop that constructive criticism if you have it. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter. We'll be sharing clips of this and ways to follow Emma if you haven't already. And thank you for listening.